The man who boarded the train and vanished before the next stop. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to night trains. It settles in after the doors close, after the platform lights slide away, after the world outside becomes nothing more than darkness rushing past glass. Passengers trust this silence. They believe that once a journey begins, everything inside the train remains contained, every person accounted for, every door secured, every destination inevitable. But trains have a memory of their own. They remember footsteps that hesitate, tickets that are never collected, seats that should be filled but aren't. On this night, the route was ordinary, the schedule precise, the stations familiar to anyone who had traveled this line before. There were no storms, no warnings, no reason to expect anything unusual. Yet just moments after departure, as the train gathered speed and the countryside dissolved into shadow, a man boarded. He was seen. He was real. More than one passenger noticed him stepping inside as the train was already moving. And then, before the next station lights ever appeared, he was gone. No doors opened, no alarms sounded. The train never stopped. At first, no one realized what had happened. It took time for the unease to surface, for certainty to fracture, for simple questions to become dangerous ones. Because once you accept that someone can vanish from a sealed train moving through the night, you are forced to ask what else might disappear with them, and whether every journey truly ends the way we expect. Departure without witness. The station was already thinning out when the final whistle cut through the night. It was not a loud sound, nor an urgent one. It carried no sense of alarm. Instead, it lingered briefly in the cool air, a simple announcement that one moment of waiting had ended and another, longer, quieter, was about to begin. Porters stepped away from the carriages with practiced ease. A last embrace dissolved into a hurried wave. Somewhere down the platform, a luggage trolley rattled once and then fell silent, its usefulness finished until morning. Above it all, the station clock continued its steady progress, indifferent to departures and arrivals alike. The train waited beneath the lights, dark green carriages lined with narrow windows, glowing a muted amber. Steam drifted lazily near the engine, curling upward and thinning as it met the cold. To anyone watching from a distance, the scene looked peaceful, almost ceremonial. Nothing suggested that the journey ahead would be remembered for anything other than its punctuality. Inside the third carriage, passengers had already surrendered to the unspoken rituals of travel. Coats were folded and placed beside legs or overhead. Bags were nudged beneath seats with feet that knew the motion by heart. Newspapers were opened, scanned, and then held without being read. A woman adjusted her scarf twice before deciding it sat just right. A man leaned back, eyes closed, counting the gentle sway of the train before it even began to move. The conductor walked the platform for the last time, boots echoing softly against the stone. He glanced into each window, not truly counting, but confirming. Faces present, seats occupied, order maintained. He had done this route more times than he could remember. Routine had long ago replaced curiosity. Nothing appeared unusual. At precisely 11:47, the signal light shifted. The train responded with a low, familiar shudder. Wheels turned, slowly at first, as though testing the weight of what they carried. The platform began to slide past the windows, smooth and measured. Light stretched into golden streaks before breaking apart and disappearing altogether. The station receded into darkness. Inside the carriage, the change was subtle but unmistakable. The gentle pull of motion prompted a collective exhale, as if everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it. A reading lamp flicked off. A page was folded and tucked away. Conversation, already scarce, fell completely silent. Outside, the countryside surrendered itself to shadow. The train gathered speed, the hum of the tracks settling into a steady rhythm that promised continuity, reassurance. The doors between carriages remained closed. The aisle lay empty. The carriage lights glowed evenly, without flicker. It was at that moment, just as the last hint of the station vanished from view, that movement appeared at the far end of the carriage. At first it was nothing more than a change in the pattern of shadows, a brief interruption where darkness shifted against darkness. Then, unmistakably, a figure stepped into view. A man entered through the connecting door between carriages. He steadied himself with one hand as the train accelerated, his balance precise, practiced. He wore a dark overcoat, neatly buttoned, free of dust or damp. There was no luggage in his hands, no bag slung over his shoulder. His hair was tidy, his posture composed. He did not look like someone who had run to catch a train. At least 3 passengers noticed him. A woman near the window glanced up, registering his presence without interest. Another passenger paused mid-thought, watching him pass before returning to the quiet of his own mind. The man seated closest to the aisle felt the faint displacement of air as the stranger moved by, close enough to be acknowledged, yet not close enough to matter. No one questioned it. Trains collect people. People move between carriages. Doors open and close. These were not events that demanded attention. The man paused midway down the carriage, eyes moving calmly from one seat number to the next. For a moment his reflection appeared in the window beside him, 2 figures overlapping, one solid, one ghost-like, sliding past the darkness outside. He chose a seat near the center of the carriage. He sat down. The upholstery creaked softly beneath his weight. He adjusted his coat once, then rested his hands in his lap. His gaze remained forward, unfocused, as though he were thinking of something far removed from the journey itself. The train pressed on. Fields blurred into indistinct shapes beyond the glass. Fences and trees merged into shadow. The rhythm of the rails grew more confident, more insistent, as the train settled fully into motion. Inside, nothing changed. The carriage lights stayed steady. The air remained warm. Passengers shifted occasionally, each movement small, unconscious. No ticket was checked. No announcement was made. The conductor had moved on to another carriage, another routine, another certainty. Minutes passed, perhaps more. Time inside a moving train stretches strangely, elastic and unreliable. What feels brief may be long. What seems long may scarcely exist at all. Somewhere during that stretch of unnoticed time, the man became unremarkable. Not absent yet, but unobserved. No one watched him rise. No one heard him move. No one noticed a door open or close. The seat he occupied blended seamlessly into the pattern of the carriage, one among many, indistinguishable from those around it. The train continued its journey, sealed and uninterrupted, racing through the night toward the next station, waiting patiently ahead. And in that ordinary, unremarkable stretch of track, between one place and another, something quietly slipped out of certainty, not with a sound, not with a signal, but with the subtle ease of something never meant to be seen, leaving it all. By the time anyone thought to look again, the journey had already crossed an invisible threshold, and there would be no simple way back. A seat that should not be empty. The first sign that something was wrong arrived quietly, almost politely. It came not as a cry, nor a sudden movement, nor even a question spoken aloud, but as a pause, a hesitation in the ordinary rhythm of the journey, so slight that it might have gone unnoticed had it occurred on any other night. The conductor returned to the third carriage just after midnight. He moved with the easy confidence of routine, his steps measured, his expression neutral. This was the part of the journey he knew best, the stretch where passengers settled fully into themselves, where tickets were produced without complaint, and time seemed to soften around the steady motion of the train. He began at the rear of the carriage, working forward. "Tickets, please." Hands moved, coats shifted, wallets opened. A ticket was passed over, glanced at, returned. Another followed. The process was smooth, uninterrupted, almost automatic. Then the conductor reached the middle row. He stopped. The pause lasted no more than a second, perhaps two, but it was enough. The seat by the aisle was empty. At first, this meant nothing at all. Empty seats were common, especially late at night. People moved. They visited restrooms. They stretched their legs. They crossed into other carriages in search of quieter spaces or stronger coffee. Still, something about this particular emptiness gave the conductor pause. He glanced down at his list. The seat number matched the ticket he expected to collect next. He looked again at the seat. It was neatly arranged. The cushion showed the faint impression of recent use, the fabric not yet fully rebounded. A folded ticket lay precisely where someone might have placed it before standing, aligned too carefully to be accidental. The conductor frowned, just slightly. He waited. A moment passed, then another. No one returned. "Excuse me," he said quietly, turning to the passenger across the aisle. "Was this seat occupied?" The woman looked up, startled by the question. "Yes," she said after a brief pause. "I believe so." "Do you know where the gentleman went?" She hesitated, her brow furrowed as she searched her memory. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Perhaps the restroom?" The conductor nodded. That was reasonable, entirely reasonable. He marked his list and moved on. But the pause lingered with him as he continued down the carriage, collecting the remaining tickets. When he finished, he stood near the door for a moment longer than necessary, glancing back toward the empty seat. Still no movement. The train pressed on through the countryside, its rhythm unchanged. Outside, darkness slid past in unbroken sheets. Inside, the quiet hum of travel resumed, untroubled by doubt. The conductor told himself it was nothing. Yet when he returned 10 minutes later, the seat remained empty. The ticket still lay there, untouched. This time, he did not ask. He walked slowly toward the door connecting to the next carriage and opened it. A narrow corridor stretched beyond, lit in the same warm, unwavering glow. He stepped through, scanning faces, seats, silhouettes. No sign of the man. He continued on, checking the adjoining carriage, then the next. He peered briefly into the restroom, apologizing under his breath before opening the door. It was empty. When he returned to the third carriage, his movements were less automatic. His eyes lingered longer on faces, on reflections, on the spaces between seats. He approached the empty place again. "Did anyone see where he went?" he asked softly, this time addressing the small cluster of passengers nearest the seat. A man near the window shook his head. "I saw him earlier," he said. "He sat there for a while." "And then?" the conductor prompted. The man hesitated. "I don't know. I wasn't watching." Another passenger spoke up. "I thought he moved to a different carriage," she said. "Didn't he?" A third frowned. "No, I don't think so." Their answers overlapped, uncertain, contradictory. The conductor thanked them and stepped back, a thin line forming between his brows. He checked the doors. Each one was closed, each one secured. The windows showed only darkness, uninterrupted by stations or signals. There had been no stops, no slowdowns, no announcements. The man could not have disembarked. Still, logic insisted there must be an explanation. People do not vanish from moving trains. The conductor told himself this firmly as he continued his search, extending it methodically through every carriage. He checked between compartments. He looked behind partially drawn curtains. He even inspected the small service areas, places passengers rarely noticed. Nothing. When he returned once more to the third carriage, the atmosphere had changed. Passengers were watching him now. Not openly, no one wanted to appear alarmed, but with the subtle attention that follows uncertainty. Conversations had dwindled to whispers, eyes flicked toward the empty seat, then away again. The folded ticket seemed suddenly conspicuous. The conductor picked it up. It was valid. Correct date, correct route, correct seat. Issued earlier that evening. Issued to a man who had boarded the train. He closed his fingers around it, feeling the thin paper crease slightly under pressure. The train sped on, sealed and uninterrupted, carrying its passengers toward a station that had not yet appeared. Somewhere in the gentle sway of the carriage, a new understanding began to take shape, unwelcome, unspoken, but persistent. If the man had not moved to another seat, if he had not entered another carriage, if he had not left the train, then the question was no longer where he had gone. It was how he could possibly be gone at all. And as that realization settled among the passengers like a quiet fog, one truth became impossible to ignore. The journey had crossed into unfamiliar territory, and the night was far from finished. Witnesses without certainty. Once the idea had taken root, it refused to remain contained. The disappearance was no longer confined to the conductor's thoughts. It seeped outward, spreading through the carriage in subtle ways, through glances that lingered too long, through silences that stretched where casual conversation should have been. The conductor returned the folded ticket to his pocket and straightened his jacket. Panic, he knew, would serve no one. Whatever had happened, it needed to be understood calmly, carefully, step by step. He addressed the passengers again, this time with intention. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said quietly, his voice even. "I need to ask a few questions." No one objected. Several people shifted in their seats, already uneasy enough to welcome clarity, any clarity at all. "You noticed the gentleman who boarded earlier," the conductor continued. "I'd like to understand when each of you last saw him." A man near the aisle spoke first. "He walked past me shortly after we left the station," he said. "Sat down right there." He nodded toward the empty seat. "Didn't say anything." "Did you see him stand up again?" The man shook his head. "No, but I wasn't
watching." A woman across the aisle folded her hands together. "I remember him sitting there," she said slowly. "He adjusted his coat. I noticed because it was very neat."
"And after that?" She hesitated.
"I don't recall."
Another passenger leaned forward. "I thought he moved to another carriage," he said. "People do that all the time." The conductor looked at him. "Did you see him do so?" The man paused. "No, I suppose I assumed." That assumption echoed through the group. "I thought he went to the restroom. I thought he changed seats. I thought he got off earlier." Each statement carried confidence until questioned. Then certainty dissolved into doubt, leaving behind only impressions, fragments of memory that refused to align. The conductor listened without interrupting, nodding as each passenger spoke. When they finished, he thanked them and stepped back, the weight of their uncertainty settling heavily on him. None of them had
seen the man leave. None of them could agree on when he had last been present, yet all were certain he had been there. The contradiction was unsettling. The conductor excused himself and walked slowly down the aisle, eyes scanning faces, reflections, shadows. He studied the carriage not as a space of movement, but as one of confinement. There were only so many places a person could be, and none of them contained the missing man. He checked the doors again, running his fingers along the seams, testing latches that had not been opened since departure. Everything was as it should be, secure, intact. The windows revealed nothing but darkness and the occasional blur of passing trees. No stations, no signals, no interruptions. The train had not stopped. When he returned to the carriage, he found the atmosphere had shifted further. Passengers were now watching one another, not openly, not accusatorily, but with a cautious awareness that had not existed before. Every movement drew brief attention. Every sound seemed louder than it had moments earlier. A woman rose from her seat to stretch her legs. Several heads turned, tracking her progress down the aisle until she sat again. A man cleared his throat. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet. The empty seat stood like a question no one wished to ask aloud. The conductor approached it once more and examined it carefully. The cushion bore the faint impression of recent use. The fabric was still slightly compressed, as though the person who had occupied it had not been gone long enough for the seat to forget his presence. That detail unsettled him more than he expected. If the man had left recently, someone should have noticed. If he had left earlier, the seat should have recovered. Neither explanation satisfied. The conductor straightened and made his way to the front of the carriage, where he paused, hands clasped behind his back. He considered informing the driver, but what would he say? A passenger is missing? No. Evidence of departure. No evidence of movement. No explanation. The words felt unreal even as he formed them. He decided to wait. Sometimes clarity arrived on its own once people were given space to remember properly. Memory, after all, often lagged behind experience. Yet as minutes passed, clarity failed to emerge. Instead, the memories began to shift. A woman who had earlier been sure the man sat beside her now wondered if she had imagined it. A man who recalled seeing him clearly could no longer picture his face. Details blurred, certainty eroded. Only one thing remained consistent: the absence. The conductor noticed it too. The longer the man was gone, the harder it became for anyone to describe him. They remembered the coat, the posture, the act of sitting, but not the person himself. It was as though he had never fully settled into the world of the carriage. This realization brought with it a deeper unease. Trains are places of order, every seat numbered, every ticket accounted for. Every journey measured in distance and time. This situation defied that order. The conductor cleared his throat. "I'm going to speak with the driver," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. A murmur rippled through the carriage. "Is something wrong?" someone asked. "I don't know yet," he replied honestly, "but I intend to find out." As he turned to leave, his gaze fell once more on the empty seat. For a fleeting moment, he had the strange impression that it was not empty at all, that it held something invisible, something that resisted being seen directly. The sensation passed quickly, leaving only a faint chill in its wake. The conductor stepped through the connecting door and closed it behind him. The carriage remained sealed. Passengers sat in uneasy silence, each alone with their thoughts, their assumptions, their doubts. Outside, the train rushed onward through the night, unbroken and relentless, carrying with it a mystery that no one could quite hold on to. Only the certainty that something was missing, and that the absence was growing heavier with every mile. A train without exit. The conductor did not return immediately. In his absence, the third carriage existed in a fragile balance between restraint and unease. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. Even the small, unconscious habits of travel, shifting in seats, adjusting bags, clearing throats, seemed suddenly deliberate, as though every movement needed justification. The empty seat remained at the center of it all. Passengers avoided looking at it directly. When their eyes drifted toward it, they slid away again, uncomfortable with the reminder that something had broken the quiet logic of the journey. Outside, the darkness pressed closer to the windows. The train had reached a stretch of countryside where towns were sparse and signals rare. There would be no station for some time yet. Inside the carriage, time thickened. When the conductor finally returned, his expression had changed. He did not look panicked. Panic would have been easier to understand. Instead, his face carried the calm rigidity of someone holding two opposing truths at once: what must be possible and what appeared to be true. He closed the connecting door behind him and addressed the carriage in a measured voice. "I've spoken with the driver," he said. "We've confirmed that the train has not stopped since departure. There have been no unscheduled slowdowns." A murmur passed through the passengers, low and uneasy. "The doors," the conductor continued, "have remained sealed." Someone near the window exhaled sharply. The conductor raised a hand, not to silence them, but to steady the moment. "I need to ask you all to remain calm. There is no immediate danger." The phrase "immediate danger" did little to reassure anyone. A man in the second row leaned forward. "Then how did he leave?" he asked. "If he left at all." The conductor did not answer right away. "That," he said carefully, is what we're trying to determine. He began moving through the carriage again, this time more deliberately. He checked each door in full view of the passengers, testing locks, pressing against frames. Each door responded exactly as it should, solid, immovable, unquestionable. He invited a passenger to try one. It did not open. He did the same with the windows, running his fingers along the seals, pointing out their intact condition. Nothing had been tampered with, nothing forced, nothing disturbed. "This train," he said quietly, "is closed." The word echoed more than he intended. A woman spoke hesitantly. "Could he have fallen?" The conductor shook his head. "There are no open doors, no broken windows, and no indication of an emergency." Silence followed. The idea had been voiced and dismissed, but its shadow lingered. If the man had not fallen, had not disembarked, had not moved to another carriage, then the train itself had become something else entirely, not just a vehicle, a container. The conductor returned to the empty seat and stood beside it. "I'd like to retrace events as precisely as possible," he said. "Please think carefully." He gestured to the man nearest the aisle. "You noticed him boarding?" "Yes," the man said. "He came through the door after we'd left the station." "Did the door remain open?" "No, it closed behind him." "Did anyone hear it open again after that?" The passengers exchanged looks. Heads shook. "No." The conductor nodded and turned to the woman across the aisle. "You recall him sitting here?" "Yes." "Did he speak to anyone?" "No." "Did he use his phone?" She hesitated. "I don't think so." The conductor listened, absorbed, catalogued. Every answer pointed back to the same conclusion. The man had entered a sealed space and then ceased to occupy it. The conductor straightened. "Until the next station," he said. "There is nothing further we can do. I ask that you remain in your seats." No one objected. The request felt less like an instruction and more like an admission. He stepped back through the connecting door once more, leaving the passengers with their thoughts. The carriage settled into an unnatural stillness. People avoided one another's eyes. Each person seemed suddenly aware of their own physical presence, of weight, of breath, of the reassurance of being seen. A woman touched her arm as though confirming its solidity. A man checked his watch repeatedly, time slipping forward with agonizing slowness. The empty seat remained untouched. Minutes passed, then more. Outside, the train thundered on through darkness so complete it felt oppressive. Occasionally, a distant light appeared and vanished, a farmhouse, a signal, something unmoving that proved the world still existed beyond the glass. Inside, the sense of enclosure deepened. The idea took shape quietly, uninvited, but persistent. If someone could disappear without sound, without movement, without witness, then what protected the rest of them? The train was no longer simply transporting them. It was isolating them, separating them from the certainty of the outside world. The seat creaked suddenly. Several passengers gasped, but nothing had moved. The sound, it turned out, had come from elsewhere, metal shifting beneath stress, the ordinary noises of a vehicle in motion. Ordinary. The word felt increasingly fragile. A man near the back laughed softly, nervously. "This is ridiculous," he said. "People don't just vanish." No one answered him, because no one was entirely sure anymore. When the conductor returned again, he carried a small notebook.
He made notes without explanation, documenting seat numbers, times, observations. The act was strangely comforting. Writing implied order. Order implied resolution. Yet as he closed the notebook, his
expression betrayed him. There was no resolution yet, only a narrowing corridor of possibilities, each one less acceptable than the last. "We'll be arriving at the next station shortly," he said. "When we do, I'll need everyone to remain where they are until we complete a full count." The words sent a quiet ripple of apprehension through the carriage. Arrival, once anticipated with relief, now carried its own tension, because when the doors opened, someone would still be missing. And the train, sealed, unquestionable, unbroken, would offer no explanation for how that absence had come to be. As the darkness outside began to thin, the first distant lights of the station flickering into view, the passengers felt the truth settle heavily among them. Whatever had happened had not occurred by chance, and whatever explanation awaited them at the next stop would only deepen the mystery that had already taken hold of the night train. The station that offered no answers. The first lights of the station appeared like distant stars, faint and uncertain through the glass. As the train began to slow, the change in motion rippled through the carriage. Bodies leaned subtly forward, then back again. The familiar sensation of deceleration, usually a comfort, felt charged now, as though the train itself were reluctant to arrive. The conductor moved briskly through the third carriage one final time before the stop. His notebook was tucked beneath his arm, his expression composed but alert. "Please remain seated when we stop," he said quietly. "This will only take a moment." No one argued. The train eased onto the platform with a low sigh of metal against metal. The rhythm of the rails faded, replaced by the sudden, unnatural stillness that followed any long movement brought to rest. Outside, the station lamps cast pale circles of light across empty concrete. There were no crowds waiting, no voices calling out destinations. This was a minor stop, late and quiet. The doors opened. Cool night air rushed in, sharp and clarifying. For a brief moment, several passengers felt relief wash over them. Solid ground existed. The world beyond the train remained intact. The conductor raised his hand gently. "Please," he said again, "stay seated." He stepped onto the platform, followed by another uniformed staff member summoned from further down the train. Together they began a systematic check, moving from carriage to carriage, counting, confirming, comparing. Inside the third carriage, the passengers waited. Some stared straight ahead. Others watched the open doorway, the rectangle of light framing the platform outside. A woman clasped her bag tightly to her chest. A man flexed his fingers, then folded his hands again, forcing them still. Minutes passed. The conductor returned, his steps slower now. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, as though grounding himself. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "We've completed the count." No one spoke. "There is one passenger unaccounted for." The words settled into the carriage like dust. "We've confirmed that no one disembarked between departure and arrival here. No one exited the train at this station except those scheduled to do so." He paused, allowing the implication to take shape. "The gentleman you described earlier did not leave the train." A man near the aisle leaned forward. "Then where is he?" The conductor shook his head. "That remains unclear."
He gestured toward the empty seat. "This seat corresponds to a valid ticket issued earlier tonight. We've confirmed that the ticket was scanned at boarding." A murmur rose, quickly subdued. The conductor continued, "There are no reports from other carriages of anyone resembling the description you provided. No one matching him exited earlier. No one matching him is present now." The conclusion was unavoidable. The man was gone. The doors remained open, platform visible and real, yet the explanation lay nowhere within reach. "We will conduct another search," the conductor said. "In the meantime, if anyone recalls any additional detail, no matter how small, please speak with me." He stepped aside, allowing those scheduled to disembark to do so. They moved hesitantly, casting glances back into the carriage as if reluctant to leave the space where the mystery had formed. When the doors closed again, the carriage felt smaller. The conductor began another search, this time with the station staff assisting. They checked beneath seats, behind panels, inside storage compartments. Every space that could reasonably conceal a person was examined. Nothing. The train, it seemed, had no hiding places left. The conductor returned to the third carriage once more, notebook open. He asked questions again, repeating them, rephrasing them, hoping repetition might unlock something memory had withheld. But each answer circled back to the same uncertain core. "I saw him, but I don't remember when. I remember his coat, not his face. I assumed he moved." Assumptions, impressions, gaps. The longer the questioning continued, the less certain anyone became. The conductor closed his notebook slowly. "There will be an official report," he said. "The authorities at the next major station will be notified." That word, authorities, brought a strange mix of comfort and dread. A woman asked softly, "Does this happen often?" The conductor hesitated. "No," he said finally. "It does not." The train remained at the platform longer than scheduled. Passengers waited, restless but subdued. Outside, the station staff spoke quietly among themselves, their voices too low to reach the carriage. When at last the conductor returned, he carried a folded paper in addition to his notebook. "We'll be continuing the journey shortly," he announced. "Please remain calm." The phrase felt almost ironic.
Now. The doors closed. The whistle sounded again, familiar, unchanged, as though nothing had occurred. The train began to move. As the platform slid away and the station lights diminished, a subtle shift passed through the carriage. The outside world retreated once more, leaving the passengers enclosed with the unanswered questions they carried. The empty seat remained. It had survived the stop, the search, the scrutiny. It had survived the return to motion. A man near the window spoke quietly, almost to himself. "If you didn't leave at the station—" No one finished the thought for him, because whatever conclusion followed felt too fragile to voice. The train resumed its steady rhythm, carrying its passengers onward through the night. And with every mile that passed, the disappearance grew less like an event and more like a presence, something that traveled with them now, unseen but undeniable. The station had offered no answers, only confirmation that whatever had happened entirely within the sealed boundaries of the train. And that made the question no longer where the man had gone, but what kind of journey allowed someone to vanish without trace.
I love how the scenery changes so
and
quickly when you're on a
continue
train. It really
as if
puts things in
nothing were
perspective.
missing at all.
I just realized something important.
Chapter 6. The Weight of What Was Missing. Full length,
800 to 1,000 plus words, rule compliant. After the station fell away behind them, the train seemed to move differently. Nothing about its speed changed. The rhythm of the rails remained steady, familiar. The lights inside the carriage glowed as they always had. And yet, to those seated within the third carriage, the motion felt heavier, as though the train were now carrying something unseen in addition to its passengers. The conductor did not return immediately. He remained further down the train, conferring with other staff, filing initial notes, preparing the report that would follow them to the next major stop. His absence left the passengers alone with their thoughts and with the
empty seat that refused to fade into the background. Conversation resumed, only in fragments. Whispers passed between seats, careful and incomplete. No one wanted to speak too loudly, as though sound itself might provoke something else to go missing. A woman leaned toward the man beside her. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured. "People don't just disappear." The man nodded without conviction. "There has to be an explanation." They both looked toward the aisle, toward the seat that offered none. The idea that the matter was being handled, that reports were being written and procedures followed, should have been reassuring. Instead, it deepened the unease. Official processes belonged to situations that could be resolved. This one resisted being shaped into something orderly. A man in the back of the carriage cleared his throat. "Maybe he wasn't real," he said, attempting a light tone that failed to take hold. Several heads turned. "What do you mean?" someone asked. "I mean, maybe no one boarded. Maybe we all assumed he did." The suggestion hovered briefly, then collapsed under its own weight. The conductor had confirmed the ticket. The seat bore the mark of use. Multiple people had seen the man arrive. "He was real," the woman said quietly. "I remember him sitting there." Her certainty sounded fragile, even to herself. As the minutes stretched on, something else began to surface, an awareness not of danger, but of vulnerability. Each passenger became acutely conscious of their own presence, of being seen, of leaving traces behind. A man shifted deliberately in his seat, creating a crease in the fabric. A woman placed her scarf on the armrest rather than keeping it around her neck. Small acts of reassurance. The train pressed on through the darkness, passing through stretches of countryside so remote they seemed untouched by time. Occasionally, a distant light appeared, an isolated farmhouse, a signal post, each one offering brief proof that the world beyond the train still existed. Inside, the carriage remained sealed. When the conductor finally returned, he did not address the entire carriage at once. Instead, he moved quietly from seat to seat, asking questions again, not the broad ones, but the smaller, more precise ones. "What time did you notice him? Where were you sitting when he passed? Did he say anything at all?" The answers, once again, failed to align. Some remembered him clearly at the beginning of the journey. Others placed him later. A few found that the harder they tried to recall, the less distinct he became. Faces blurred, features dissolved. By the time the conductor reached the empty seat, the man had become little more than an outline, a coat, a posture, a moment. The conductor stood there longer than necessary, staring down at the place where the man had been. "This seat," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else, "has been empty for over an hour." The statement landed heavily. An hour was not a momentary lapse. It was not a simple oversight. It was a span of time long enough for absence to settle into fact. The conductor closed his notebook. "I need you all to listen carefully," he said. The carriage grew still. "When we reach the next major station, authorities will board the train. They'll ask questions. They'll search again." A pause. "Until then, I ask that you remain in your assigned seats as much as possible." The request was reasonable. It was also revealing. Movement, once ordinary, had become suspect. After he left, the carriage sank into silence again, thicker than before. Even the train's motion seemed subdued, as though the sound itself had learned restraint. In that quiet, new thoughts began to form, thoughts no one wanted to entertain but could not quite push away. What if the disappearance had not been random? What if it had been selective? The idea was unsettling not because it suggested danger, but because it suggested intention. That something had chosen a person and removed him without disturbing the rest. Passengers shifted, suddenly aware of their individuality, of the fact that each of them occupied a specific seat, held a specific ticket, existed in a specific place at a specific time. The sense of being accounted for had never mattered more. A man checked his ticket again, smoothing it carefully. A woman counted the seats ahead of her, then behind, as though numbers might offer protection. The empty seat remained untouched. It was no longer merely vacant. It felt marked, defined not by what it contained, but by what it did not. The train rushed onward, carrying its sealed carriages through the night. Outside, the darkness thickened once more, swallowing the faint traces of the station behind them. Inside, the passengers sat in uneasy stillness, each grappling with the same unspoken realization. Whatever had taken the man had done so without struggle, without sound, without leaving anything behind. And that, more than any unanswered question, weighed heavily on the journey that still lay ahead. Chapter 7. The Pattern That Would Not Form. Full length, 800 to 1,000 plus words, rule compliant. By the time the train reached the long stretch of track between major stations, the night had fully claimed the landscape. There were no lights outside now, no distant houses, no signal posts breaking the darkness. Only the steady, unbroken rush of movement beneath the wheels served as proof that the train continued forward at all. Inside the third carriage, the absence had matured into something else. It was no longer a shock, nor even a fear. It was a presence, quiet, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Passengers had stopped whispering. Silence filled the carriage, not as a pause between sounds, but as a constant state. The usual background noises of travel, rustling paper, shifting fabric, the occasional cough, had dwindled to almost nothing. Everyone sat unusually still, as though movement itself might invite notice. The empty seat remained untouched. The conductor returned once more, but this time he did not carry his notebook. He stood at the front of the carriage for a long moment before speaking, eyes scanning the faces before him. "I want to clarify something," he said finally. "This is not the first time something unusual has occurred on this route." The statement drew immediate attention. A man near the aisle frowned. "What do you mean?" The conductor hesitated, then continued. "Not disappearances, nothing like this, but irregularities, delays without cause,
Reports of misplaced luggage that later reappeared. Doors found unlocked without record. A woman's voice cut through the stillness. "You're telling us the train does things on its own?" "No," the conductor said quickly. "I'm saying that not every incident fits neatly into procedure." The distinction did little to ease the tension. "What about other passengers?" someone asked. "Has this happened to anyone else?" The conductor shook his head. "Not like this." He gestured subtly toward the empty seat. "This is unprecedented." The word lingered. He turned and walked slowly down the aisle, stopping beside the seat once more. "I've been trying to identify a pattern," he admitted. "Something that explains why this person and not another." Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. "There is no pattern," the conductor continued. "Not in seat location, not in timing, not in ticket type." "Then what about the man himself?" a woman asked. "Who was he?" The conductor paused. "That," he said, "is part of the difficulty." He looked at the passengers. "Can anyone describe him now? Not the coat, not where he sat. Him." Silence followed. A man opened his mouth, then closed it again. A woman shook her head slowly. "I thought I could," she said. "But now, I can't." They tried. One said he was tall. Another said average height. One recalled dark hair. Another wasn't sure. Each detail dissolved under scrutiny, slipping away like something half-remembered from a dream. The conductor nodded, as though this confirmed something he already suspected. "He left very little behind," he said quietly. After he left again, the passengers sat with that idea. The man had boarded. He had occupied space. He had been real enough to displace air, to crease fabric, to carry a valid ticket, and yet he had not left an impression strong enough to endure. That realization unsettled them more than the disappearance itself. If someone could exist so lightly, so briefly, what did that say about the nature of presence? A woman near the window wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't like this," she whispered. No one argued. The train pressed onward, its motion relentless, uncaring. Outside, darkness swallowed everything beyond the glass. Inside, the conductor's words echoed. No pattern, no precedent, no explanation. A man in the back of the carriage spoke suddenly. "What if the pattern isn't about him?" Several passengers turned. "What if it's about the train?" he continued. "About where we are, not who he was." The idea hung in the air. The conductor had not denied irregularities, he had acknowledged them. Doors unlocking without record, delays without cause. A woman shook her head. "Trains don't choose." The man shrugged. "We choose trains. Maybe sometimes they choose something too." The conversation faded quickly, leaving behind discomfort rather than insight. Minutes stretched into longer spans of time. The carriage seemed suspended between stations, between explanations. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, just once, enough to draw a collective breath from the passengers. They returned almost immediately, steady and unchanged. The train's motion did not falter. Still, the effect lingered. A reminder that systems, however reliable, were not infallible. The conductor reappeared at the door. "We'll be approaching the next major station in approximately 20 minutes, he said. "Please prepare to remain seated upon arrival." Again, the phrasing felt significant. Remain seated, accounted for, visible. The empty seat, however, would remain empty.
As the train continued its passage through the night, the passengers felt a subtle shift within themselves. The mystery had ceased to be something external, something that had happened to someone else. It had become a question aimed at each of them. Why him? Why there? Why now? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what ensured it would not happen again? The train offered no answers, only motion, only darkness. Only the unyielding certainty that whatever rule governed the disappearance lay beyond patterns, beyond procedure, and beyond anything they could easily name. And as the lights outside finally began to reappear in the far distance, one truth settled among them with quiet inevitability. The next station would not resolve what had been lost. It would only confirm that the train, and those within it, had carried the absence far beyond the point where it could be dismissed as coincidence. The silence before arrival. As the train began its gradual approach toward the next major station, the darkness outside softened. It did not retreat all at once. Instead, it thinned in layers, first allowing faint shapes to emerge, then distant lights, then the suggestion of structures beyond the glass. The world reintroduced itself cautiously, as though unsure whether it was welcome. Inside the third carriage, no one felt relief. Arrival, once anticipated as an ending, now felt like an intrusion, an interruption that threatened to solidify what had so far remained suspended between certainty and doubt. The conductor walked through the carriage once more, slower. This time his presence measured. He stopped at each row, his eyes lingering just long enough to confirm that every seat, except one, was occupied. People sat straighter under his gaze. They were no longer merely passengers. They were witnesses, participants in something that resisted naming. The conductor paused beside the empty seat and rested his hand lightly on its back. "For clarity," he said quietly, "no one has left this carriage since the last station." No one contradicted him. Outside, the rails began to sing differently, the pitch shifting as the train reduced speed. The sound was unmistakable, a sound that signaled nearing arrival, nearing interruption. A woman near the window whispered, "I almost wish we wouldn't stop." The man beside her nodded. "At least while we're moving, nothing changes." The train slowed further. Street lights slid into view, tall and evenly spaced. Buildings emerged, their windows dark at this hour. The station ahead was larger than the last, more structured, more official. Order waited there. So did questions. The conductor straightened. "When we stop," he said, "station authorities will board briefly. They may ask you to remain where you are." The phrase had become familiar. Remain where you are. Remain visible. Remain present. The irony was not lost on anyone. As the train eased along the final stretch of track, the carriage seemed to hold its breath. Even the smallest sounds, the faint creak of upholstery, the soft rustle of clothing, felt amplified. The empty seat sat between two occupied ones, stark in its normalcy. It did not look ominous. It did not look strange. It looked like it belonged to someone who had simply stepped away. And yet, the longer it remained empty, the more it felt like a boundary, a point the rest of them dared not cross. The train slowed to a crawl, then stopped. The sudden stillness was jarring. The motion they had grown accustomed to,
The reassurance of
forward movement vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it felt almost physical. The doors opened. Cool air swept in once more, carrying the scent of metal, concrete, and distant rain. Footsteps echoed faintly from the platform outside. 2 uniformed officials stepped into the carriage. They were calm, efficient, unhurried. They introduced themselves quietly, asked the conductor a few questions, and then turned their attention to the passengers. "We understand there's been a discrepancy," one of them said, his tone neutral. "Yes," the conductor replied. "A passenger is unaccounted for." The official nodded. "We'll ask a few questions." They moved through the carriage systematically, confirming names, checking tickets, asking when each passenger had boarded and where they were headed. The process was orderly, almost comforting in its predictability. But predictability did not yield answers. When they reached the empty seat, one of the officials paused. "This is the seat?" he asked.
"Yes." He examined it closely, crouching to inspect beneath, behind, around. He stood again and looked out the window, then up at the luggage rack. Nothing. "Anyone see him leave?" the official asked. No one spoke. They finished their checks and stepped back toward the door, conferring quietly with the conductor. Their voices were low, indistinct. When they returned, one of them addressed the carriage. "At this time," he said, "there is no indication of criminal activity, no evidence of forced exit, no reason to delay the train further." A woman spoke hesitantly. "Then, what do you think happened?" The official met her gaze. "We don't know." The honesty of the answer unsettled her more than any speculation might have. The officials disembarked, the doors closed, the whistle sounded, and once again the train began to move. As the station slid past and the lights receded, something shifted within the carriage. The
investigation, brief as it had changed the nature of the mystery. What had once felt unreal now carried the weight of acknowledgement. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was an absence officially recognized and yet officially unexplained. The train accelerated, pulling away from the last place where answers might reasonably have been expected. Silence returned. Passengers sat with the knowledge that the world beyond the train had been consulted and had offered nothing. A man near the aisle leaned back slowly. "If they can't explain it—" No one finished the sentence. The train rushed onward, its sealed carriages once more enclosed by darkness. And in that darkness, the realization settled with quiet finality. The mystery would not be resolved by arrival. Whatever had taken the man had done so without leaving a trace strong enough to follow, and without intention of giving itself up. The journey continued. The empty seat remained, and the silence that filled. The carriage now was not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something that had chosen to remain unanswered. Chapter 9. What remained after the search. Full length, 800 to 1,000 plus words, rule compliant. After the train pulled away from the station, the carriage settled into a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the uneasy silence of waiting, nor the strained stillness of investigation. This silence carried acceptance, thin, reluctant, but unmistakable. The questions had been asked, the answers, such as they were, had been given, and nothing had changed. The conductor returned to the third carriage once more, but now his role had shifted. He was no longer searching. There was nothing left to search for. He moved slowly,
checking on passengers as one might check on people after a storm has passed, not to find damage, but to confirm survival. Some nodded when he passed, others avoided his eyes. He stopped beside the empty seat and regarded it for a long moment.
The ticket was gone now, taken as evidence. Without it, the seat looked no different from any other, ordinary, unremarkable. And yet, everyone in the carriage knew exactly where it was. The conductor finally spoke. "We'll be reaching the final destination in just over an hour," he said quietly. "There will be no further stops before then." The statement carried an unexpected weight. No further interruptions. No more opportunities for clarification. The journey, such as it was, would now complete itself. After he left, the passengers remained still, their thoughts turning inward. Each person seemed occupied not with what had happened, but with what it meant. A woman stared at her reflection in the darkened window, watching it merge with the blur of motion outside. For a moment, she found it difficult to separate her face from the passing night. A man folded his hands in his lap and held them there deliberately, grounding himself in the sensation of touch. Others closed their eyes, not to sleep, but to escape the persistent awareness of being watched by absence. The train sped on through the night, the rails humming beneath it like a constant, subdued voice. Outside, the darkness returned in full, uninterrupted by stations or signals. Inside, the carriage felt strangely smaller. The idea took shape quietly, moving from passenger to passenger without being spoken. What if the man had not simply vanished? What if he had been removed? Not violently, not suddenly, but precisely. The thought was unsettling, not because it suggested danger, but because it suggested intention without motive. A selection. And if that were the case, then the absence itself was not random. It was purposeful in some way they could not perceive. A woman leaned toward the man beside her. "Do you think he knew?" she whispered. "That something was going to happen?" The man shook his head slowly. He didn't seem afraid. That detail lingered. The man had boarded calmly. He had chosen a seat. He had adjusted his coat. He had behaved like someone who expected the journey to continue normally. The conductor returned again carrying a small bag. He paused beside the empty seat and carefully placed something on it. A blanket. "I found this folded in the storage compartment," he said quietly. "It may have belonged to him." No one spoke. The blanket was neatly folded, its edges aligned, its fabric unwrinkled. It looked unused. The conductor stepped away, leaving it there. The presence of the object changed the atmosphere immediately. It was proof, not of what had happened, but of who had been there. A woman reached out, then stopped herself, withdrawing her hand before touching the fabric. The blanket remained undisturbed. As the train drew closer to its final destination, fatigue settled over the carriage. The long stretch of uncertainty had drained something essential from everyone present. Shoulders slumped, eyes grew heavy. But sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the train sounded too loud. Every shift of weight felt conspicuous. The awareness of being present, of continuing to exist, remained sharp. The empty seat held its place among them, now accompanied by the folded blanket, a quiet marker of what had been lost. The conductor made his final pass through the carriage, ensuring everything was in order. "We'll be arriving shortly," he said. "Please gather your belongings." The instruction was familiar, routine, and yet it carried a quiet tension, because arrival no longer meant resolution, it meant separation. The passengers would disperse. They would return to their lives, carrying the memory of the journey with them. The train would be cleaned. The seat would be reused. Life would proceed. But something would remain unresolved. As the lights of the final station appeared in the distance, the carriage seemed to loosen its grip slightly, as though the journey itself were nearing its end. The train slowed. People stood. Bags were lifted, adjusted, reclaimed. The empty seat remained empty. No one claimed the blanket. When the train finally came to a stop, the doors opened once more, releasing the passengers into the night. They filed out quietly, each casting a final glance back into the carriage. The empty seat, the folded blanket, the space where someone had been. The conductor remained behind, standing alone in the carriage as the platform emptied. He looked down the aisle one last time, then reached out and picked up the blanket, folding it again with care. As the doors closed and the station lights dimmed, one truth lingered with him, heavy and unresolved. Whatever had happened had left almost nothing behind. And yet, the absence it created was impossible to ignore. The train stood ready for its next journey. But for those who had witnessed this one, it would never again be simply a means of travel. It would always be the place where someone had vanished, and where the silence that followed proved more lasting than any answer. Chapter 10. The Journey That Continued. Full length. 800 to 1,000 plus words, rule compliant. The platform emptied quickly once the train came to rest. Passengers dispersed into the night with the quiet urgency of people eager to place distance between themselves and something they did not fully understand. Footsteps echoed briefly, then faded. Voices rose and fell, ordinary and unremarkable, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred at all. From the outside, it looked like the end of any routine journey. Inside the third carriage, the conductor remained alone. He stood in the aisle for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of electricity, the subtle ticking of cooling metal. The train felt different now, not alive, not threatening, but altered, as though it had completed something and moved on. The empty seat no longer looked conspicuous. Without passengers around it, it blended into the orderly symmetry of the carriage. Just another numbered place, waiting patiently for its next occupant. The conductor walked toward it slowly. He paused beside the seat and rested his hand on the fabric. It was cool now, the last trace of warmth gone. Whatever impression had once marked it had faded completely. He exhaled. The report would be written. It already had been, in fragments. Timelines, observations, confirmations. Facts assembled carefully around a hollow center. Passenger boarded after departure. Seat occupied. No recorded exit. No disturbance. No explanation. There would be follow-up questions. There would be speculation. There might even be theories circulated quietly among staff who had worked the route long enough to know when something did not behave as expected. But none of it would change what had happened. The conductor moved through the carriage one final time, straightening armrests, checking under seats, restoring the careful neutrality of a space designed to forget its occupants as soon as they left. When he reached the end, he stopped and looked back. For a moment, only a moment, He had the strange sensation that the carriage was full again, not with people, but with impressions. Echoes of presence layered invisibly over one another. Then the feeling passed. He switched off the lights. The carriage fell into darkness, indistinguishable from any other resting train awaiting its next departure. Later, long after the paperwork had been submitted and the train prepared for its return journey, the seat was occupied again. A different passenger, a different night, a different destination. Nothing unusual occurred. No doors opened unexpectedly. No seats were left empty without reason. The journey unfolded exactly as planned, measured and precise. And yet, for those who had been there on the night of the disappearance, something fundamental had shifted. They would remember the journey not for its destination, but for the moment they realized that certainty could slip away without warning. That systems built on order and routine could still contain spaces where explanation failed. Some would try to dismiss it. Others would speak of it only rarely, and then only in quiet moments, framing it as an oddity, a story that felt less solid the more it was told. But none of them would forget the empty seat. They would remember how easily they had assumed movement explained absence, how confidently they had trusted the boundaries of doors and windows, of timetables and procedures, and how that trust had been gently, irrevocably unsettled. The train continued to run the route. Night after night, it carried passengers through darkness, past stations and signals, through stretches of countryside that revealed nothing and concealed everything. Most journeys passed without incident, but sometimes, very rarely, someone would glance at a seat beside them and feel a momentary, inexplicable unease, a sense that the space was more significant than it appeared. They would dismiss the feeling quickly. After all, people did not simply vanish from moving trains. And yet, somewhere between one station and the next, between arrival and departure, the possibility lingered, quiet and unresolved. A reminder that not every journey is defined by where it ends. Some are defined by what they lose along the way. And once that truth has been witnessed, no train ride is ever quite the same again. Some mysteries do not end with answers. They end with a feeling, a quiet awareness that certainty is more fragile than we like to believe. The train reached its destination. The passengers went home. The tracks stretched onward, unchanged. And yet, something had slipped through the spaces between stations. Something no report could fully explain, no witness could clearly remember, and no timetable could account for. Perhaps the man was lost. Perhaps he was taken. Or perhaps the train, moving steadily through the dark, simply passed through a moment where ordinary rules no longer applied. We trust journeys because they repeat themselves, because they follow schedules, because they promise arrival. But sometimes, between one place and the next, something is left behind, not in the carriage, not on the tracks, but in the certainty we carry with us. And if you ever find yourself on a late-night train, if you notice an empty seat that feels too deliberate, if you sense that something is missing, even though nothing appears wrong, you may remember this story and wonder not where the passenger went, but whether every journey truly carries everyone who boards it, all the way
to the end.